I think we are ready to open this edition of 2024. Helping?
Yeah.
Yes. Minko?
Thank you, Xenia.
It's a beautiful ribbon.
So I'm not sure if I need to introduce Minko, but Minko was here at the very first edition, and he was not even working at Google, and now he's like a big boss of Angular. And yeah, it's a long time no see, but the things change. A good career move, going to NGB. So please give a warm welcome to Minko, flying all the way from America. Big difference. What time is it now at California?
It is 11:30. Right? Oh no, actually, it's midnight. It's going to be midnight in 6 minutes.
So giving a talk at the midnight.
And I didn't sleep last night, so we'll see how this is going to go. All right. So I plugged in my laptop. Can we switch to my slides? Here we go. So hi, everyone. My name is Minko Gechev. I'm an engineer on the Angular team, where my role is just to make sure that we are building the right things so that we can make sure the developers are successful. I'm also leading the Angular convergence with our internal framework, Wiz. Wiz is this almost mythical technology that we have been using in our billion user products, such as Google Search, Google Photos, Google Drive, and others. So we're trying to cherry pick the best features from Wiz and open source them through Angular. And I'm going to mention a couple of features that we kind of developed that way. If you have more questions about it, I'll be around. We can chat in the afternoon. I may just go for a quick nap just to make sure that I have some sleep for the past 48 hours or so. As Xenia mentioned, I was here back in 2016. It was pretty exciting actually to see myself on the website of NGB this year, because 2016 was the very first edition of NGB. I was not working at Google, not part of the Angular team. I had my own startup back then. I was building a couple of applications, and the UI of one of them was using Angular. And it was scaling a lot for the 2016 style of applications. It was a couple of hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and I wanted to make sure that I keep adding more code and the application doesn't collapse. So that's why I gave this talk about scalable application architecture. I was also here when Igor announced that Angular will be following semantic versioning, and from version 2, it will be skipping to version 4. I was very, very tempted to fake announce that we're releasing Angular version 3 today. I even have a slide about it, but I decided to skip it. You know, versioning has been a sensitive topic in Angular, so you don't want to put more oil in the fire. Thinking back about 2016, the world was a very different place. That was 3 to 4 years away from COVID. Remember? And we didn't have Gen AI back then. Just things were very different. I'm just curious, anyone, what is your most prominent event from 2016? Anyone has? What is that? Graduation. Yeah? Yeah? For me, actually, it was Pokemon Go, probably. I remember walking down the street and kind of dodging people so that we don't clash in each other while catching Pokemons on the street. And 2016 was a very transformative year for both Angular and for myself. Back in 2016, I was here in NGB, and just a couple of months before that, I moved to the United States from my home country, Bulgaria. I I was not part of a big company, so nobody really sponsored my transition. I had a startup, and I was really motivated to go to San Francisco so that I can build my startup, and I can make connections, and I can grow as an engineer. But I left my entire life in Bulgaria. It was a tough transition. All my friends, my family, my language, my traditions, everything was in Bulgaria. And in San Francisco, I didn't know pretty much anyone. All new traditions, new language. My brain used to hurt for the first couple of months, people speaking to me in English. It was not easy. And to make it even harder, when I arrived in San Francisco and I tried to get some money from the ATM, my debit card didn't work. So I was jumping from a cafe to cafe, trying to get some free Wi-Fi to try to find other ATMs in the area. And I remember I tried at least 20 or 30. I was very consistent. Just my hunger, literal hunger, was driving my consistency. And around 4 a.m. or so, I woke up from jet lag, and I was really hungry. I wanted to get some food in my Airbnb. I got some tap water, and I was thinking, how can I get access to the money in my bank account? So I ended up sending money to myself with Western Union. And I went to a couple of Western Union offices. In the first one, they gave me this exact form. I filled it. They asked me, what is your address in the United States? I said, well, I don't have one. What about your phone number? I didn't have one either. And when they saw that I filled also myself as the sender and the receiver of this money, they thought that there might be something sketchy given that I'm also an immigrant. And they didn't give me the money. So it was a pretty rough start for the first couple of years. But what was driving me was just to make sure that I ship a lot. I grow as an engineer, and I keep delivering value to the Angular community and also developing my startup. Angular was going through a very tough transition as well, from AngularJS to Angular. And it was very tough not only for the Angular team and the technology, but for all the developers that were using AngularJS at the time, because Angular was very breaking. And the team also kept shipping more and more features over time, kept kind of losing focus and delivering individual modules that were potentially fitting well together, but kind of pursuing different goals. And the release date kept being pushed back, and there were a couple of really tough years after that for Angular. I'll say 2020 was particularly hard, not only because of COVID, but everything that was going on with Angular as well. Well, now it is 2024. Finally, I have a debit card that actually works. And I built my community in San Francisco. I have real friends, not only friends from GitHub, but people I really hang out with. And Angular is going through its renaissance. So what actually happened between 2016 and 2024? There were a lot of events that happened in the meantime. And it was really hard to pinpoint one pivotal point that led to this transition, putting Angular and myself in somewhat more secure place and making Angular thrive again. So I tried to cluster individual events into a couple of main lessons that I discovered that helped both Angular and myself. The first one was to set boundaries. The second one is to build relationships. And the third one is to learn and iterate. I'll start with the first one, setting boundaries, because it was the least intuitive to me. Because setting boundaries sounded like we're putting a wall between us and everyone else. And we don't really want to put a wall between Angular and developers, right? We want to make sure that we address developers' requirements. Over time, I realized that boundaries are more about honoring our own limits so that we can make sure we provide the love that others deserve. Because if we keep being bloated and unfocused and we keep delivering everything, we may end up delivering nothing. Let me show you how we set boundaries actually for Angular. First, what we did was to define very clear vision what Angular is. And the second step was to just communicate that. Back in 2016, Angular was one framework, mobile and desktop. A little confusing, right? It's actually a web framework, and it's not even mentioned on the website. And that was putting the team in a really hard position. We had to deliver for iOS, Android, Windows, Linux, macOS, and also for the web platform. And we were a relatively small team. Instead, what we realized is, well, our strength has always been to build a web framework. So instead, we just want to make sure that we make developers successful by enabling them to deliver web apps with confidence. That's it. We also don't want to build a fancy technology that makes you experience risk every time when you build a new application. We want to make sure that you have a stable experience and you can just build applications with confidence and deliver. This allowed us to focus on exactly what we're building, a web framework, and externalize everything else as a plugin for end-to-end testing, linting. This way we prioritize web development, and we partnered with other ecosystem teams on multi-plat, for example, with Ionic and NativeScript, and we focused on one particular problem that we were solving. Another problem was in managing feature requests. So it is really hard to say no sometimes. And that's a boundary that we can set. And here is how it becomes healthy. Because when we keep collecting feature requests that we really appreciate and we would eventually may want to implement, we set incorrect expectations. Instead of saying, well, this doesn't belong to Angular, we keep collecting feature requests, and at some point we don't have even the bandwidth to respond to all of them. We had over 4,000 issues at some point, and a team of 20 or so people, we just couldn't engage with everyone even though we really wanted to. And this was making some developers upset because they spend their time to open a feature request, write, like share why it's a good idea, and at some point we just couldn't respond to them at some point, and people were frustrated. Instead, what we started doing is, if we believe that something doesn't fit the vision for Angular, we would communicate that and we would close the feature requests. It might be a better idea to implement it as a community plugin, but even though we closed it, it made fewer developers frustrated because they were at least heard. This way we reduced the issue count with 50%, and we have been significantly more focused. Building relationships has been another thing that really made a difference. First one, building relationships within the team. Because this way we're not going to build modules each for themselves. Instead, we're going to build something holistic that has focus and drives the framework forward. By combining the individual pieces this way, we can make sure that we're multiplying their impact. This way, everyone can contribute to the team's vision and also be more focused. Building relationships with other teams, such as, let's say, Vite and Playwright, and also internal teams, such as TensorFlow, Firebase, and others. We have been building more relationships also with community members, and last but not least, with other framework authors. We have been, in fact, collaborating very closely with Ryan Carniato from Solid in integrating signals in Angular. We have been talking to Evan Yu because he built Vite, and Vite turned out to be a really good fit for Angular CLI. We have been working with Rich Harris from Svelte and others because we all have shared mission to make web development better. Now, the last lesson was around learning and iterating, because it's surprising how many people and how many times we can easily just fall into the trap of perfectionism and want to build something that is perfect from the beginning, and we can spend years building it without actually delivering value. Instead, what we started doing is to collect requirements from developers in the form of interviews or user studies, just conversations with different people, collecting feedback on GitHub, social media, in-person conversations, just looking at industry trends, other frameworks, and validating all this thing with developer surveys. Now, this way we have a lot of data, so we have to prioritize the feature requests that we're going to implement, and once we have the stacked features, we can go to the next stage, which is feature development, where we usually do a lot of prototyping, just to validate whether this solution is actually feasible. We go through requests for comments to collect community feedback, and from there, often we do more prototyping in order to incorporate the community feedback. After that, we do user studies, where we literally hire developers to use a particular API, and we watch them use it, so that we can see where the friction points are. After that, we usually release an API in developer preview, we validate it, and finally, we graduate it to stable. And we did that with quite a few features. In version 14, standalone components. In version 15, faster builds with EOS build. Version 16, signals. 17, deferrable views, control flow. Version 18, we shipped experimental for zoneless. And 19, just a couple of weeks ago, incremental hydration. And together with this, hundreds of others feature requests. There are way more than I could fit on the slide. And in order to reflect this future-looking nature of Angular, we also refreshed the brand. And I'm really happy to see it right here as well. Now, I'd like to spend the rest of the presentation just talking about Angular version 19 that we released recently and some idea about what we'll be focused on in 2025. So our focus for the past couple of years hasn't changed much. We have been building features that make Angular more performant and improve developer experience. And since the very beginning, probably because of the bumps around AngularJS to Angular, we are really focused on stability and reliability. We want to make sure that we provide migrations so that we can move you to the latest development practices. Around developer experience, we worked on signal components or different signal APIs. And a couple of releases ago, we shipped signal query, signal inputs, the new function-based outputs and model inputs. And now, in version 19, they're stable. And we also delivered a bunch of schematics that allow you to move or transform your existing code to use these new APIs. We, in fact, try them with Google Fonts. So if you go to fonts.google.com, all of this is using Signal APIs and zoneless. And we validated the development experience significantly better. Actually, that's one of the reasons why we shipped other reactivity APIs, such as Resource and Link Signal. We just saw that there is a need for them by helping the Google Fonts team migrate. We also validated signals with YouTube. So currently, YouTube Mobile Web is using Angular signals via Wiz. Wiz is this internal framework that I mentioned at the beginning. It is using Angular signals under the hood. And YouTube noticed some significant performance improvements on their smart TVs as well as on their mobile web application. Signals are also the path to zoneless. And zoneless would speed up initial render because you would not have to download Zone.js and from there wait for Zone.js to monkey patch all these browser APIs. It will enable better developer experience because you're going to have more meaningful stack traces, improve interop with Angular and other frameworks. For example, having a library that uses request animation frame is no longer going to trigger thousands of change detection cycles. And it is also going to align you better with the web platform. This doesn't mean that Zone.js is going away. We're going to make it optional, and we're going to enable a very easy way to opt out of it. Pretty much if you use on-push change detection for all of your components, you'll be very much zoneless compatible. And that's how we can experiment with zoneless. It is a feature from version 18, but I wanted to mention it just because it is going to be our probably #1 priority for the next year. And the more feedback we receive, the more we'll be sure that we're providing a good developer experience. Now, I'd like to spend some time talking about performance, and the most opportunities we saw in the performance space was around improving server-side rendering so that we can encourage more developers to use it. On the performance side, so usually when you load on applications with SSR enabled, you would receive a bunch of HTML from the server. The browser will have to parse this HTML, render the application, and download all the reference JavaScript. After that, it is going to execute this JavaScript. The JavaScript is going to add event listeners. And this process from executing the JavaScript to adding event listeners is so-called hydration. And finally, when all the event listeners are already attached, your application will be interactive. That's a long period of time for your application to become interactive here, right? From your application becoming visible to interactive, this could be from, I don't know, a couple of hundreds of milliseconds to a couple of seconds, depending on your application size. So in the meantime, the user might be interacting with your application, but nothing would happen because you would not have JavaScript event handlers to handle these user interactions. That's where we collaborated with the Wiz team. They have been having the same problem with Google Search for many years now, and they have been solving it with something called JS Action or Event Replay, which is pretty much like one very small library, just a couple of kilobytes, that captures user events, and once the JavaScript responsible for handling them is available, this library replays them. Here is how you can enable it in Angular with event replay configuration in your client hydration provider. And here is how it works. So that's a very simple application. That's how we built applications on the Angular team as not being designers, as mocks. You have a grayed out app, which means that it is not hydrated. When it becomes blue, it is hydrated and it can handle user events. You can see that while it is grayed out, the user clicks a couple of times on the button and nothing really happens. But when it hydrates, we see that there are 4 items in the cart. So this is a better experience, but still not ideal, because still, like, there are a couple of milliseconds, a couple of seconds even in this case, because we throttled the network where nothing really happens. In order to improve it, we'll just need to shrink this period of time even further to improve responsiveness. And we can improve responsiveness just by reducing the number of the amount of JavaScript that we download and we have to execute. And we do that with incremental hydration. This is a feature that we shipped in version 19. I wanted to show you how it works quickly. Here is a small e-commerce application that we have as a demo. And it is also grayed out. We're using the same kind of style just to simply show how hydration works. In practice, it doesn't have to be grayed out. It could be with your application styles. When part of the application gets its regular styles, this means that it is hydrated, it can handle user interaction. Now, if I click on the search bar, you can see that I downloaded a bunch of JavaScript. This JavaScript is responsible for handling user events in the search bar. And if I type something here, you can see that the search bar now works. So at the beginning, I have very small amount of JavaScript. I just have this event replay library. And when I start interacting with the application, I gradually download more JavaScript that is responsible for handling user events. Now, if I put my cursor, for example, over this item list, you can see that I downloaded a bunch of more JavaScript and hydrated this part of the application. And if I do that the same here, I didn't download anything in this case because it's the same component as the one above. And this way, you can download only the JavaScript that is responsible for handling a particular user event, significantly reducing this time right here. That's my personal favorite feature in version 19, and I'll recommend you to give it a try. It is available in developer preview. And here is how it works. So these are deferrable views from version 17. You can just wrap part of your template in a defer block, and with deferrable views, Angular is going to just lazily load the calendar component in this case. In order to use partial, or in this case, like incremental hydration, just change it to hydrate on idle. And that's it. This means that Angular is going to render the calendar component on the server, and on the client, you're going to get the rendered component, but without downloading any of the JavaScript associated with it or hydrating it. And when the browser is idle, Angular is going to download the JavaScript associated with the calendar component and hydrate it. That's pretty much how it works. It has slightly different semantics compared to deferrable views because it has some server-side rendering semantics, but on the client, it behaves pretty much the same way. Now, in order to improve the developer experience for server-side rendering further, we worked on route-level render mode config. So you can specify for each individual route whether you want it to be pre-rendered, server-side rendered, or client-side rendered, and for routes that have parameters, for example, the path right there, you'll be able to get the individual kind of parameter, in this case, IDs for the product, so that you can pre-render each individual product page. Now, with all this work that has been happening on the team, we have been also seeing a lot of exciting things happening in the community. For example, we're at NGB today, and it has been tough for all these conferences to come back after COVID. And NGB is one of the 10 conferences that we had this year around the world. I personally was able to go to NGConf, to Angular Belgrade, and I think that was it for me this year. Excited about traveling more next year. But we had more conferences also in Kenya, in Tel Aviv, in Warsaw, and others. We have been seeing a lot of cool open source work happening as well. I keep adding Brandon and Analog.js to my slides because he has been doing a lot of fun stuff. He has been implementing, for example, some server actions similar to the remix forms in Angular with Analog.js. Brandon has been experimenting with different authoring experiences as well. Just a lot of cool features, really. Also, people from the React community have been building some integrations with Angular in TownStack, which has been wonderful to see, and also in Redux. All right, that was the community shoutouts. There are many other things that I couldn't include, and I'm also probably running a little bit tight on time. I wanted to talk about what is coming up next, and I have just a couple of minutes, so I'm going to cover only the main highlights. Next year, we're thinking about Zoln as a stable. I mentioned already that this is our #1 priority. But a couple of things that we have been seeing that have been driving a lot of developer satisfaction are around improving developer experience with authoring format. Specifically, the new control flow drove a lot of satisfaction. And we see opportunities with selectorless and enhanced component authoring experience. Also, something that will be focused really hard next year is improving the integrations of the existing Angular forms, HTTP module, and router with signals, and developing a form signals module, or a signals form module. Now let us look at what selectorless is, because that's something that I'm very passionate about, specifically improving the ergonomics of how you develop applications. That is a traditional Angular component here, with an app component. It is a standalone component, probably like a version 19 component, because we have standalone true by default right now. You're importing mat button and a tooltip from the component library, and after that, you're importing them in the component metadata. And this seems like a redundant import in the component metadata, because they're always going to be this same set of components. Previously, with ng modules, you could provide this app component, you can put it into a different context, different ng modules, and the selectors can match different elements potentially. But with standalone components, you're always going to use this exact instance, this exact mat button, and this exact tooltip. So this import in the component metadata is entirely redundant. And we've been seeing a lot of people actually struggle to understand why this exists. People who don't have Angular experience and just struggling to build their first Angular component that way. Something that we have been thinking about is, what if we completely remove this import and we directly reference this mat button component from the local module scope? For directives, it becomes a little bit trickier because we need to introduce a new syntax. In this case here, in this hypothetical syntax, we decided to use @tooltip and provide the input title in parentheses. That's something that we'll be exploring next year, and today I'll be curious to hear your thoughts about it. We have been thinking about other challenges with component authoring as well. We started having some brainstorming sessions on how to resolve some of the more challenging aspects of component authoring. For example, how do you reference a local variable from your module directly in your template without assigning it to a property inside of your class? That's something that requires some boilerplate. How do you access an enum, let's say, in your template? There is no straightforward way. Or how do you have statically typed content projection? There is currently no easy way. So very early brainstorming of different alternative authoring experiences that we have, some of them inspired by analog, are a more functional one, or a more HTML first one, or a class-based one that is a little bit more particular about where exactly your template is located so that we can know which of your expressions inside of the template belong to the class instance versus to the local scope of the module. Still, these are very early only brainstorming sessions that we had. There is nothing concrete, and if we decide to move forward with any one of them, we're going to go to all these different steps of validation that I mentioned at the beginning. And again, just an idea. We'll follow up with an RFC if we decide to evolve the component authoring experience in a certain way, and hear all your feedback. All right, so today we're at 2024, and we want to make sure that Angular is in a secure place again in 2032. That's every 8 years. We want to likely going to continue focusing on performance and developer experience, because that's how it usually goes in web frameworks. The business is driving the development of bigger applications, and the size of the applications is often a conflicting requirement to performance and developer experience. So we need to scale the performance and developer experience with the complexity of web applications. And we would also want to do that while providing a stable and reliable update path. We're going to do that by following our 3 lessons: to setting boundaries, making sure that we know exactly what Angular is, and setting correct expectations, building relationships within the community, the team, and the ecosystem, and by learning and having this iterative approach, collecting feedback and iterating. Well, that's everything I had for you today. Thank you very much for being here, and looking forward to connecting later today.